Get your hands off that elevator button. The executive floor is not for maintenance staff. He said it loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. Loud enough that the receptionist behind the marble desk looked up. Loud enough that two junior analysts waiting for their morning coffee froze mid-reach. Loud enough that the security guard near the entrance shifted his weight, suddenly unsure whether he was supposed to intervene. The man who said it was Clifford Haas, Senior Vice President of Operations at Haas Merton Capital Group, a position he had held for 19 years, a position he never let anyone forget, for more than about 45 minutes at a stretch. He was the kind of man who wore his title the way some people wear cologne. Too much of it, applied first thing in the morning, detectable before he even walked into a room. The woman standing at the elevator was Renata Josephine Odom. She was 51 years old. She was wearing a charcoal blazer, dark slacks, and a pair of low-heeled shoes that had seen better days, because she had taken a red-eye from Phoenix and come straight from the airport. Her carry-on bag was still on her shoulder. She hadn't had breakfast. She had been awake for 22 hours. She pressed the button anyway. Clifford Haas took 3 steps toward her, not to help, to repeat himself. I said the executive floor requires a key card. You don't have one. Building services has their own entrance on the side of the building. You people always come through the wrong door. You people. 2 words. 19 years of confidence packed into 2 words. Renata Odom looked at him. Not with anger. Not with embarrassment. She looked at him the way you look at something you've already decided isn't worth the energy of a full reaction. Then she looked back at the elevator doors. I know where I'm going, she said. That was it. 4 words, no explanation, no credentials, no performance. Clifford Haas laughed. It wasn't a small laugh either. It was the laugh of a man who genuinely found the situation funny, who was genuinely confused that someone wasn't obeying him, who had spent 19 years in a building where people moved when he spoke, and was experiencing, maybe for the first time in a long time, the strange sensation of being ignored. The elevator doors opened. Renata Odom stepped in. Clifford Haas followed her. He was going to make this a thing. You could see it in the way he straightened his jacket, the way he pulled his shoulders back. He was going to make this a thing because he had an audience, and because somewhere in his mind the logic was airtight. He belonged on that elevator. She did not. I'm going to need you to step out, he said, inside the elevator now, pressing the door open button. Or I'm calling building security right now and having you escorted out. Renata Odom pressed the button for the 41st floor, the same floor Clifford Haas was going to. He noticed. She watched him notice. She didn't say anything. That floor, he said slowly, is for C-suite and board-level personnel only. Scheduled meetings require advance clearance, so unless someone invited you. Someone did, she said. Who? She looked at him for a long moment. The board, she said. The elevator doors closed. If you had been there, if you had been one of those junior analysts watching from the lobby, you would have seen Clifford Haas's face go through about 4 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Skepticism, amusement, irritation, and then something else. Something that wasn't quite any of those things. But the doors were already closed, and Renata Odom was already looking straight ahead. Let me back up, because this story doesn't start in a lobby. It starts in a town called Gulfport, Mississippi, in a small house on a street where the oak trees were so old they'd cracked the sidewalk in 6 different places, and nobody had ever fixed it. Renata Odom grew up in that house. Her mother worked the early shift at a laundry service, and her father drove long haul until his back gave out, and then he drove shorter haul until that gave out too. There was money, but it was the kind of money that gets counted at the end of the month, not the beginning. The kind of money where you know exactly how much everything costs because you have to. She was good at school the way some kids are just built for it. Not because it came easy, but because she refused to let it be hard. She had the kind of stubbornness that teachers either loved or found exhausting. The kind that meant she would sit with a problem until it opened up, no matter how long it took. She got a partial scholarship to a state school. She worked the other part. She graduated with a degree in finance and took a job at a mid-sized investment firm in Atlanta where she was, for the first several years, one of maybe 3 black employees and the only black woman in any room above entry level. She knew what that meant. She had always known what that meant. You learn to read rooms before you walk into them. You learn to measure the gap between what people say and what they do. You learn that competence is necessary but not sufficient, that you have to be twice as prepared and half as emotional, and always ready to be underestimated. She was ready. She had been ready her whole life. 23 years she worked in that industry. She moved firms twice. She built a reputation in private equity that was, by her early 40s, solid enough that people called her before deals closed, not after. She had a gift for reading companies the way some people read people. Not just the numbers, but the structure, the culture, the invisible, load-bearing walls that kept organizations standing or brought them down. In 2019, she and 2 partners founded Odom Quan Capital. By 2024, they had $1.4 billion in assets under management. By early 2026, they had quietly acquired a controlling interest in Haas Merton Capital Group. Quietly. That word matters. Renata Odom had done this intentionally. The acquisition had been structured through a holding company, announced to the Haas Merton board in a private session, kept out of the press until the paperwork was finalized. She had learned over 2 decades that the announcement of power is less useful than the possession of it. You don't tell people you're coming, you arrive. The board meeting on the morning she walked into that lobby was her first in-person visit to the Chicago headquarters. She had chosen not to send an advance team. She had chosen not to have someone call ahead. She had flown in alone, taken a taxi from O'Hare, and walked through the front door of a building she now effectively owned. And a man named Clifford Haas had told her she was using the wrong entrance. The 41st floor smelled like carpet cleaner and old money. The kind of office space that had been renovated once in 1998 and touched up twice since, always carefully, always in ways that suggested permanence, solidity, the impression that nothing here had ever needed to change. The receptionist on the 41st floor, a woman named Janet Price, who had been at Haas Merton for 11 years, and who had, it turned out, been briefed, stood up when the elevator opened. "Ms. Odom," she said, "welcome. The board is assembled in conference room A. Can I take your bag?" Clifford Haas, who had ridden the entire 41 floors in silence, standing 2 feet to Renata Odom's left, heard this. He processed it. You could see the thing happening behind his eyes. The slow, grinding recalibration. The way a machine sounds when it's been fed the wrong input and has to decide what to do with it. Janet had said her name. Janet had been expecting her. Janet had stood up. Renata handed off her bag. She smoothed the front of her blazer. She looked at Clifford Haas one time, briefly. The way you glance at something on your way out of a room. Then she followed Janet down the hall. Clifford Haas stood at the elevator bank for a moment that was probably 6 seconds, but felt significantly longer. Then he walked to his office, closed the door, and sat down. His assistant, a young man named Theo, who had worked for him for 2 years and who had a gift for knowing when to stay invisible, stayed invisible. The Haas Merton board was 8 people. 6 of them had been on a call with Renata Odom 3 weeks prior. 2 of them were new additions, brought in as part of the transition. All 8 of them stood when she walked in. She told them to sit down. She introduced herself, not because they didn't know who she was, but because she believed in the ritual of it, believed that beginnings mattered, that the first words in a room set the temperature for everything that followed. She said her name. She said the name of her firm. She said what she intended to do with the next 12 months of Haas Merton's operations. And she said it without slides, without a presentation, from memory, in the flat, specific language of someone who had studied this company longer than most people in that room had been paying attention to it. Nobody interrupted. She spoke for 40 minutes. When she finished, the board chairman, a man named Roland Achibi, who had been practicing corporate law for 30 years, and who was not easily impressed, said, "That's the clearest strategic overview I've heard in this room in a decade." Renata Odom said, "Thank you. I have a few questions about the operations division." Here is what Clifford Haas did not know, and what takes a little time to explain properly. Haas Merton had been underperforming for 4 years. Not catastrophically, not in the way that makes headlines, but underperforming in the slow, grinding way that erodes value, without anyone being able to point to a single decision and say that's where it went wrong. The founder, Warren Haas, had retired in 2021. His son, who had been expected to take the reins, had instead decided he wanted to live in Costa Rica and grow coffee, a decision that the board had responded to with the specific kind of panic that happens in institutions that have never had to plan for an uncertain future. Clifford Haas had stepped into the resulting vacuum the way certain people step into vacuums. Not because they were the best option, but because they were there, and they were loud, and they had been around long enough that everyone assumed they knew something. He had been SVP of operations for 7 of his 19 years, and had spent the remaining 12 building a reputation that was, on close examination, constructed more from presence than from results. He had blocked 2 acquisition proposals in the past 3 years. Both of them, in retrospect, would have been good for the company. He had blocked them because they would have changed the structure of the organization, and any change to the structure would have required someone to examine his division closely. And a close examination of his division would have revealed that the numbers he reported to the board every quarter were built on a set of assumptions that had not been revisited since 2019. Renata Odom's team had found this in due diligence. They had found it, documented it, and said nothing until the acquisition closed. She had a way of doing that, holding information until the moment it was most useful. Not as a weapon, as a tool. The board meeting ended at noon. Renata Odom asked Roland Achebe to have Clifford Haas brought to the conference room. Roland Achebe's assistant made the call. Clifford Haas arrived 4 minutes later, the way a person arrives when they've been sitting in their office for 3 hours, slowly understanding that something has shifted but not yet knowing how much. He walked in and saw Renata Odom sitting at the head of the table. He stopped. There is a particular kind of stillness that happens in a person when the world has just rearranged itself around them, and they haven't caught up yet. It's not quite shock. It's not quite understanding. It's the moment before both. "Mr. Haas," she said, "please sit down." He sat. She did not remind him of the lobby. She did not bring up the elevator. She did not reference his words. "You people, the wrong entrance. I'll call security." She did not perform the satisfaction of the reversal, even though she had earned it, even though every person in that building who had watched what happened that morning would have understood completely. She was not there for satisfaction. She was there to run a company. "I've reviewed the operations division's reports from the past 4 years," she said. "I want to talk about the assumptions underlying the Q3 projections." Clifford Haas looked at her. "I have the documentation here," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "I'd like your explanation of the revenue modeling on page 7. He opened the folder. He looked at page 7. The color left his face the way water leaves a glass when you tilt it, slowly at first, then all at once. "This is?" He started. "Accurate," she said. "I had 2 independent analysts verify it." The room was very quiet. "The board has been provided a copy," she said. "I wanted to give you the opportunity to respond before any formal decision is made. There are people who, when the thing they feared most finally arrives, rise to meet it. They find some last reserve of dignity and they stand in it. And there are people who don't, who crumble, or deflect, or do something that surprises even themselves." Clifford Haas deflected. "I don't know who you think you are," he said. His voice had changed. The authority was still in it, but it was performance now, scaffolding with nothing behind it. "I've been running this division for 19 years. Whatever your firm thinks it's doing here." "My firm," Renata Odom said, "owns a controlling interest in this company. The acquisition was finalized 6 weeks ago. The board voted to proceed unanimously. That's not my opinion, Mr. Haas. That's a matter of public record as of last Friday." Silence. "The irregularities in your division's reporting constitute, at minimum, a significant failure of fiduciary responsibility. At maximum, something more serious. Legal has been briefed. HR has been briefed. You'll receive formal notice by end of day." Clifford Haas said nothing. "Do you have anything to say about page 7? She asked. He closed the folder. That was his answer. If you think the lobby incident caused what happened to Clifford Haas, you're missing the point. And this is important. This is maybe the most important part of this whole story. What happened to Clifford Haas happened because of 19 years of choices. The lobby was one morning. The folder was 19 years. Renata Odom would have found those numbers, whether he had said a word to her or not. She had been finding those numbers since before she got on the plane in Phoenix. The disrespect in the lobby didn't seal his fate. His own record did. But here's what the lobby did do. It told you something about the kind of man who could look at a woman walking into a building and decide, in 3 seconds and with no information, that she didn't belong there. The same instinct that made him block those acquisitions. The same instinct that made him trust his own assumptions instead of checking them. The same arrogance that built a career out of confidence and forgot to build it out of substance. The lobby was a symptom. The folder was the disease. She had seen both. She had understood both. And she had walked into that conference room knowing the difference. In the weeks that followed, a lot happened quickly. Clifford Haas resigned. The word used in the press release was stepping down to pursue other opportunities, which is the corporate language for something that was not entirely voluntary. The legal review of the operations division took 6 weeks and resulted in findings that were shared with the board and handled as Renata Odom had promised, according to the severity of what was found. The 2 junior analysts who had been in the lobby that morning, a young woman named Priya Nambiar and a young man named Seth Caldwell, both later said they hadn't known what to do when they heard Clifford Haas speak to the woman at the elevator. They had both been with the company for less than a year. They had both understood, on some level, that what they were hearing was wrong. Neither of them had said anything. Priya Nambiar said this in a staff meeting 6 weeks later, when Renata Odom held an open session with the junior staff and specifically asked whether there were things about the company culture they wanted to address. Priya said it quietly, with her eyes on the table. She said she had been in the lobby, and she hadn't known what to do, and she wanted to say she was sorry. Renata Odom looked at her for a moment. "You were 11 months into a new job," she said. "You didn't have the power to intervene without risking something real. I don't hold that against you." She paused. "But I want you to remember the feeling. The discomfort of watching something wrong happen and staying quiet. I want you to hold on to that. Because the next time you see something like that, you're going to have more power than you did on that morning. And I'd like you to use it." Priya Nambiar said she would. She meant it. Janet Price, the receptionist who had been briefed and who had stood up when the elevator opened, was promoted to executive office coordinator 4 months later. She sent Renata Odom a handwritten note on the day the promotion was announced. The note said 3 sentences. The last one said, "I noticed the bag was heavy and I wished I'd taken it sooner." Renata Odom kept the note in her desk drawer. She had a thing about keeping notes like that. Small, handwritten, specific. She said once, in an interview that ran in a business publication the following year, that the texture of a handwritten note reminded her of the way her mother used to leave messages on the kitchen counter before the early shift. That some things worth saving are worth saving on paper. The interviewer asked her about the lobby incident. By that point, it had gotten out. These things always do. And it had become one of those stories that circulates in certain professional circles, forwarded in emails with subject lines like "you have to read this," and told in women's leadership conferences with varying degrees of accuracy. Renata Odom was quiet for a moment. "I've been in that situation more times than I can count," she said. Different buildings, different lobbies, different men in different suits making the same calculation in 3 seconds. She looked at the interviewer. The calculation is always wrong. And the people who make it almost never understand what it costs them. Not just professionally, but in terms of what they miss. What they could have learned. Who they could have known. She paused again. "I stopped being angry about it a long time ago. Anger is expensive. I'd rather invest the energy." The interviewer asked what she meant by that. "I mean exactly what I said," she said. "Racism is expensive. Arrogance is expensive. Assumptions are expensive. Mr. Haas paid 19 years of that bill in one morning." She picked up her coffee. "I've got work to do." The oak trees on her mother's street in Gulfport have cracked the sidewalk in 8 places now. Nobody has fixed it because the city has other things to fix, and the street is not a priority, and the trees are old enough that cutting them back would take something from the neighborhood that couldn't be replaced. Renata Odom's mother is 73. She still lives in the house. She has a landline, and she uses it, and she calls her daughter on Sunday mornings after church, and Renata Odom answers every time, no matter where she is, or what city she's in, or how many hours she's been awake. Her mother doesn't follow business news. She doesn't know the names of the companies her daughter runs, or the dollar amounts attached to them. What she knows is that her daughter sounded tired when she called the Sunday before the Chicago trip, and sounded like herself again the Sunday after. "How'd it go, baby?" she asked. "It went fine, Mama," Renata said. "You eat?" "I ate." "Good," her mother said. And then, because she always did this, she said the name of a neighbor from 2 streets over who had just had a new grandchild and moved on, and they talked about something else entirely. The meeting on the 41st floor, the lobby, Clifford Haas and the elevator button, and the words "you people" hanging in the marble and glass air of a building that now, on paper and in practice, belonged to the woman he had tried to turn away. None of that was in the Sunday call. Some things don't need to be said to the people who already know who you are. And Renata Josephine Odom had always known exactly who she was, long before any board confirmed it.